Now, part of what we've developed here, and this is kind of, someone asked me why I developed this. And I said, because I was so frustrated with everything else out there as a consultant, and that I was the biggest obstacle for companies taking this into their organizations and scaling it throughout. In the past, I've had a lot of success with executive leadership teams and then senior management, or on a project, that core project team. Getting it beyond there, it became a cost issue, became a logistics issue. And so that's why we've gone to this new model of really dialing in on what's the most important part of what we do. And that most important part, if you look at, if you've gotten the Clifton Strengths Finder 2.0 book, and I've purchased the coaches manuals, and you get this big, huge box of binders, only 1% of it is really relevant. You go through the whole book and there's only 2 or 3 sentences in my achiever strength and 2 or 3 sentences. So our decision was to filter out all of that content noise, focus in on the thing that's most important, which is a description of what you look like at your best, a description of how you get in your way, something that you have some authorship in. It's not just a computer telling you this is what it looks like, and a simple process for your personal growth and for developing people. That's it. That's the whole thing. With the tools we provide in the software and making it an intuitive process, and then giving support with online training, the YouTube videos that we'll be putting into LearnDash so there's more structure to it. The templates of questions that you can ask, and just simple curiosity. I feel that we can take the 80% of managers, actually 82% of managers that Gallup says can't do this, we can give them the ability to help develop their people. Now, the big change in how we're doing this is moving from focusing on content, lots of content, like a day workshop. And those are great. People love when I do the day workshop and do the magic trick and all that stuff. Nobody remembers or knows what to do, and the managers feel intimidated. So the model is called an inductive model, or learn by doing. Instead of teaching you all about, let's say, a bicycle, I'll give you a manual on the history of a bike, how a bike is made, the parts of the bike, give you an assessment on what style of bicycle riding you do best, tell you the 4 colors of the bike, give you 5 minutes on the bike. The goal is very quickly to move people in getting on the bike. Then with some training wheels, which is the app and the facilitator, then they're ready to go, and they use it on a daily basis. So the new habit that we're working on, and this is a mind shift, a little bit every day consistently, that's the big game changer. And it's called Kaizen, it's called marginal gains, it's called continuous improvement. So thinking of a 1% gain every day. And so I'll walk you through what that looks like on a personal level and what that looks like on a team level. All right, so the facilitator role is the big change. We're putting the capabilities in the organization, and so there's two functions. There's the facilitator function, and there's the admin function. The admin function is competency around managing the app or the software, adding people, subtracting people, configuring teams, running the reports, all of that. The facilitator role, I'll walk through what that competency consists of. And first, it's the curiosity. It's not about being an expert. So think of it this way. In the past, I would come in as the Jedi or the master cabinet maker. Now we want to create it so that an apprentice who's curious can implement this. And we've tested it with freshmen in high school. And freshmen in high school they get up and running on it. First of all, the app is a no-brainer for them. But second of all, they love kind of that inquiry-based model of learning about their friends around the framework of the traits and the strengths. The other part of the role of the facilitator is getting people up to speed, building their paragraph. When we say onboarding, it's basically building their 2 paragraphs. I just took a principal from an architectural firm, through it. He said, man, this is easy. I could do this. And I said, well, we still want to train you. And he said, well, okay. But that's the other role, the ability to facilitate a team session. So there's 2 ways to facilitate a team session. One, the team can build their paragraphs together in real time, either live on the app. And I've done this virtually where I drive the bus on the app and people pick, or using the worksheet, the trait worksheet, and they do it manually and discuss it, and then later input that into the app. But the comfort level on carrying on the dialogue of taking the team through it. And I'll walk you through some of those questions that you might ask as a team facilitator. The third element is supporting managers, helping managers get comfortable with helping people build their paragraph, or helping give feedback based on their strengths using the trait worksheet, and building in the icebreaker moments in meetings so that every week, the start of a meeting or the end of the meeting, some kind of question around, for example, Mary, what's your go-to strength and why? Which strength would you pick as your signature and why? And then everybody shares. And then another week, it might be, so Mary, which strength do you want to work on the most this week and why? And then everybody shares. Just that little bit, 5 to 7 minutes in a meeting and continuously throughout the year, that's the game changer. And I'll share with you a little bit of the brain science behind it too. Now, managers need to be comfortable in helping a new member create their paragraph together with the manager, the weekly icebreakers, and then using the trait worksheet. And I'll show you a copy of the trait worksheet. This is probably the most used report we have, so much so that we're going to build it in and automate it. Right now, it's a printout. It's a manual version of selecting your top trait for each strength in your genius and your kryptonite. And I'll show you the different uses that we've got. Performance reviews. Now, I should say performance feedback. These are not formal reviews, so I'll change the language, but the performance feedback that we're creating is a daily, weekly, continuous, where you might ask me to give you feedback, creating what I think you look like at your best, and creating what I think, which traits get in your way when I work with you. And I did that with my kids over the holidays. I'll share that story. They love giving dad feedback. Peer-to-peer feedback. So using that trait worksheet to give it to your peers, and your peers creating a paragraph of what they feel you look like at your best and how they experience your traits get in your way. And then building bridges, which is another way for conflict competency. So if you and I are having challenges working together, the way we would do that is you would ping me and say, hey, I'd like to build a bridge and work on how we work together. I would send you a copy of my trait worksheet. That's the unfilled out version of the strengths and the kryptonite. And you would send me a copy of yours. I would build my version of how I experience you at your best and the traits that get in my way working with you. When we come together, it now becomes a show and tell and compare and contrast conversation. Once you've completed your genius and kryptonite traits, there's a report called a user profile, which is a summary of your leadership ring, your genius paragraph, your kryptonite paragraph, and then a short summary of each of your 5 strengths. When we come together, you'd start out by sharing how you see yourself at your best. And that's the show and tell. And then I would share how I experience you, which ones I picked the same and why, which traits I picked different and why. And then we reverse the role. When we move to the kryptonite, you would share, Rex, these are the things that give me a hard time. And then I would share the ones that I selected the same and why, and the ones I selected differently and why. And now we've built this great context and conversation where we have this level playing field and we've got these nice guardrails. Now we can focus on specifics about the areas that I struggle with in working with you. And then how do we build a bridge here? So when I experience that thing that I have trouble with, do you want me to tell you in the moment, during the meeting? Do you want me to circle back? That's called the rules of engagement. We start building our rules of engagement, always with the commitment that when I experience it, I'm going to now come back and say, hey, that thing we talked about that happened in the meeting, or I sent you something and didn't hear back. That's part of the kryptonite thing. And here's how it impacted what I was doing. Here's what I thought when it happened. I read into it. And so now you keep coming back and working on that. And we've got some executives at some high-level companies where it's not a one and done. You know, we keep, but we've identified and we've narrowed it down to these few things are the ones that are the real triggers. And so we keep coming back and revisiting and getting better, and the conversations get more rational and they get more moving forward versus rehashing past. And the nice thing is that the manager or supervisor doesn't have to get in the middle. Now, sometimes I do the refereeing in that, but ultimately we're trying to build the ability for anybody to do that. Now, we've also started using this for PIP. So I'm working in a couple of situations where somebody's lack of understanding and managing their kryptonite has gotten to the point, even though they're very talented, it's making them ineffective. The great thing with this is I told that person to give the trait worksheet to 6 of their peers that they work closely with. And the particular strength that is the strength that is the one that gets this person in trouble is the activator strength. We call it the no filter. So this person has some very analytical, highly rational, almost Vulcan-like thinking strengths. And then this activator where it just blows you out of the water. So we've identified the strength that's the trigger, but the neat thing is that all 6 of those individuals picked the same attribute of activator. And that attribute was that I sometimes speak and act before I think. So now instead of this, I'm in trouble, I don't know how to improve. Now it's really dialed into just one particular trait and behavior. And we've now been able to build some awareness of that and some protocol. So one protocol is in a meeting, take notes. And before you speak, write down what you're going to say before you say anything. That's that instead of stimulus react, it's the stimulus pause react. So that was the problem. There was no pause in the thought and the speaking. And so now we've got some protocol. And the next thing we're going to do is, after a month, go back to the same individuals and look for, on a scale of 1 to 5, what kind of improvement on that trait are we seeing? So now it's really pinpointed. It's not ambiguous. She feels hope, and it's very specific and pinpointed. So the resources that we have for you and your organization include, we have weekly forums. So every Thursday, we have what we call the Genius Mastermind Forum from 11 to noon Central Standard Time. What's really good about this is these are experienced coaches. Some are professional coaches, some are internal. So part of graduating as a facilitator is to conduct a workshop, do one of those forums to share how you're using it, lessons learned, or to bring up a big question. So one of the coaches brought up the question of the language around kryptonite. How does everybody feel about it? How are you getting into it? Are you getting resistance? It's a great learning platform, and those are free. The other forum that we're going to start, it's the onboarding forum, and Nathan's going to do that. And that's around learning how to use the app and building your paragraph. If a company or a team, for example, when we do project teams, they will send their people to that onboarding app to get them up to speed, so that when we come together and do the partnering session, we're not spending half the morning building the paragraph. Now, there's great value if you have time for a team to collectively build the paragraphs together and have people weigh in. But if not, we do that for you. So that's a time saver and a cost saver. I will be sending to you this week a recipe or menu of icebreakers that managers can use in meetings, like the ones we talked about earlier. What's your go-to strength and why? And we're picking up on what a lot of the contractors I work with do for safety moments. At the very beginning, here's the exits, here's where we're going to meet if something happens, and here's a story of why it's important. Well, same thing. We'll shine the light. That's the reinforcing side. We'll shine the light on someone's strength, or we'll reinforce by having someone talk about what they want to improve, or a strength that was really something they enjoyed last week in what they did. But it's all about that reinforcement. And every week we do that, I get to learn a little bit more about Mary. And so it layers in instead of one day, all day data dump workshops. And then you have Nathan and myself as resources. Any questions that come up, any help. My primary role, I'm going to be giving 80% of what I typically do over to you and your organization. But there are times when you want to do a deeper dive analytics of a team, for example, or a challenging relationship, or working with a team to take their team profile and working it into their business development presentation and I've done this with several contractors where they have taken the unique profile of the team, worked that into their presentation to the client, talked about their strengths approach to team building. And we've had $1.2 billion bed tower project and new headquarters for an energy facility and a state treasury building where the owner was so impressed with the process they have for building high performing teams that they brought us in to use the same thing with them. The worksheets, that's another tool that you'll have. And I'll walk through the worksheets as we go through the training here, some of the different worksheets for you. So the first one, it's a new one and we're excited about it. It's called the zone map. So what I'm excited about is that 13 of the strengths Gallup puts in a different category than core clarity. We've talked about it. We call them chameleon strengths, but there was really never a clear roadmap on what those categories are. Now, in the future, when we create our own assessment, we'll be able to eliminate even this level of, trying to understand chameleon strengths, because we'll focus in on our assessment on just, let's say, communication, for example, at the very top. Core clarity puts it as a relating strength because of an individual's ability to tailor communication to the audience that they're speaking to. So think of it as a speaking or writing version of individualization, really able to tailor content to the person. Gallup puts it in the motivating zone because the people with communication are so articulate that it's persuasive and it gains buy-in. Now, what we will do is in our assessment, we'll have certain questions that just focus on the relating side and just focus on the communicating side. We won't call it communication, but we'll start dialing in so that when it's done, it'll be much clearer as to which zone they fall into. For example, responsibility. I will ask questions about responsibility that focus on the reliability side of responsibility. So that would be orange, the acting side. And then we'll have questions that focus in on the loyalty side of responsibility. That would be the relating side. And what we're finding as people are filling these out, that these strengths get pulled into the orbit of other strengths. So if you have 2 or 3 orange strengths in the profile and responsibility, then responsibility will tend to fall into the acting or the reliability side. If you have more relating strengths in there and that kind of connectedness piece, that relational piece, we find, now this is not universal, but in general, they get pulled into that relating side. So this has been fascinating from a research side for us and helping us design our free assessment so that we can kind of deal with this, this complexity of having to think in 2 languages at the same time, core clarity language and a Gallup language. And we should have this by June, our version of the assessment. Our goal is to help people articulate that paragraph of what they look like at their best. That's the goal. We're also going to be mapping Enneagram, DISC, Myers-Briggs, Berkman, and the VIA assessment to those trait sentences. So our IP is around those 480 trait sentences. And we've already mapped, we just have to start coding now. And the other thing we've just added here are the descriptions of the rings. But the next iteration will be the shadow traits of these rings. And think of these, when you watch, the Avengers, for example, each of those heroes is an archetype, right? They're either highly intuitive and empathic, or they're high courage and bravado or whatever, but they all, and these are universal patterns. So that's what we're aiming at, is to capture these, give symbolic language to these universal traits as shorthand to help us better identify with individuals and understand them more. And then the user profile, when you've completed your genius paragraph and your kryptonite, what you'll have is a description of the ring, the archetype. And the reason for the ring is we want it to be a completed image, not an image that has a missing quadrant to it. We've had a lot of people in some of the other systems we've worked with wonder if they were deficient in some way because they didn't have strengths in a certain category. The other thing we like about this is that it's a clearer picture of what zone you're dominant in. So if you look at my ring, what zone is it very clearly that I'm dominant in?
It's the
What color? What
It's
color
the
am I?
green. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the green.
Yeah,
Right,
it's
for that's genius.
it's the green. So that tells you something about me, that I'm in my head a lot, that I do a lot of thinking, but I still have that servant leader tendency. In the future, we will also break out people who might be dominant blue servant leaders or dominant orange servant leaders, because even though they are collegial, reliable, and thoughtful behind the scenes leader, they will have different focuses. One will be more focused on getting things done. That's the orange. One will be more focused on the team dynamic. And mine is more focused on the planning and the thinking things through. So that gives another level and layer of language that's coming. So now we've got the trait worksheet. The trait worksheet is essentially the app, the filling out of picking one of the 8 sentences in an analog form. It's a PDF. And it's very useful in workshops. For example, when we do military bases, a lot of times they can't even get access to the app because of their firewalls. So we'll take this sheet to the workshop, and people will simply either check or circle the sentence, and then they'll socialize it as a group. So it does create an extra step, because then they have to translate it to the app. But this is a very workable tool for workshops that you don't need to do a lot of pre-work for, or hope everybody filled out their paragraph ahead of time. That's the other tendency in a workshop, is that, if 2 people don't fill it out, then you still got to take the time to get them to fill it out. So this is kind of standard for workshop. I'm getting ready to do a conference where we'll have about 250 people. They'll all have their packets. We're going to use this as the way they work. And we'll pair people up so that there will be more than one of these, and you'll be able to ask me and play the facilitator role. So you can still play the facilitator role of asking, okay, Rex, which one of these would you pick at your best? And as I'm working it through and picking one, you would ask as a facilitator, so why did that one rise to the top for you? Or was there a close second? Would you change the wording of any of those to make it more accurate? That's the role of the facilitator. Help to think out loud and work through that process. This trait worksheet also becomes the key feedback tool. This would be the one you would give, you'd print this out and give it to your family first. Let them fill out what they think you look like at your best and how you get in your way. I gave my kids this worksheet at Christmas morning. I said, okay, we're going to play a game. You're going to give Dad feedback to be able to let him know where Dad is awesome and where Dad is not so awesome. And they had a blast doing it. Now, my daughter said, Dad, every time we get together, you turn this into a workshop. And I learned something that I had never known before about my kryptonite. So see strategic here. That's my number one strength. So my kryptonite is I can think that what's clear to me is clear to others. That's the one I picked. All 3 of them picked a different one, and they picked the same different one. They picked the one that sometimes I can interrupt or jump ahead because I assume I know where the conversation is going. So when my oldest son was the 3rd one who said, Dad, I picked that same one too, all 3 of them picked it. I said, what? And they said, Dad, you do it all the time. I had never seen that. So one of the things that I'm learning that is so valuable, I've given this feedback form to clients, to peers, to people I mentor. It's just been an incredible way of just seeing how I show up to others at my best and how others experience. And that's part of creating that ongoing continuous feedback culture. So step 1, when I coach somebody, I say, okay, print out several of these sheets, give it to people next time we come together, I want to hear what you learned from that. Then the next thing is give it to your peers. Then the next thing, all the people I coach at a high-tech firm, their managers gave it to their subordinates, and they had one-on-ones. There's 3 pieces that make this process so powerful. One is the reinforcing the positive. Number 2 is the feedback, getting the feedback from all different angles. And number 3 is reflection. Where did I show up at my best? Where did I not? Which elements in my genius came alive when I showed up at my best? That was an awesome experience. What would I do better when I didn't do as well as I thought? What elements of my kryptonite got in my way? How would I have done it differently? Those 3 elements are the magic of the process. Here are some of the reports in the teams. So this one is a team user profile. What it doesn't have here is the team's genius paragraph and the team's kryptonite. But the team can create its own version of what we look like at our best and the things that get in our way. And it's a fun process to give everybody a copy of the team's trait worksheet, have them fill it out independently, then share and compare and contrast, and then land on those 5 positive traits and those 5 kryptonite traits, and then share it with the rest of the team, the organization. So this is a team version of that. We also have the badges that you can print out. And the way this works is that you cut them vertically down with a paper cutter, you fold them, laminate them, then have a lanyard. And we can give you the sources where we get our materials from. We are working on upgrading the graphics on this so the branding is more consistent. But right now, it's functional as if you're doing a workshop. And having these badges open and displayed, it's a fast visual picture of somebody's ring. Like, look at Beth Hernandez, okay? And compare that to Brian Poppy. You immediately, just color-wise, see, okay, completely different energy, fluency. And so this is part of the visual language and the shorthand that we want to continue to reinforce as often as we can. And one of the ways is to have the badges displayed. And then there's the team profile. This is where I go in and I do some of my Jedi combinations and make notes and stuff like that. So if it's a team, what I typically recommend is that each person bring their copy of it. In fact, when I first started out, I laminated my copy with my management team that I led. And as people spoke, especially when it's spontaneous or with some passion, positive or negative, I know something's triggering. And I would make a mental note, what just fired off here? And that would be my way of starting to learn how their different strengths show up. And this is a version of the leadership rings. So this again gives a nice picture of the distribution of different leadership styles. This is the team version of the trait worksheet, where the team would build a paragraph of how they feel they look at their best. This is the group that meets on Thursdays. This is the Thursday mastermind group. So I just pulled them out. And you can see as a group, lots of green and orange in terms of the aggregate of it's probably about 40 people, which gives you an interesting insight into the kinds of people that are attracted and gravitate to doing this kind of coaching. And then the name tents. And these are very valuable in workshops, especially for me at my age. I need to have those names there when I'm doing workshops with people. It's a nice thing to have because it's a good summary of their leadership ring and their 5 strengths. And again, if you're in a workshop with people are looking around, it's a quick visual, and you can do fun little exercises, icebreakers. It's like one icebreaker would be, find the 3 people that you're most similar to with your ring, and they mix around and they have to compare and contrast and find each other. Now find somebody who is completely opposite than you. Now, when you look at the team, so when you have the team, each individual, if you go to the far right, there'll be 3 little dots. And when you pull up that dot as an administrator, you'll get to do a few things. You can add, you can give that person certain access privileges, you can remove them from the team, or you can print out the worksheet package. And the worksheet package is very simple. It's the user profile and their trait worksheet. And it's there so that it makes printing out the workshop packets easier, so you're not doing all this collating. That's what it's there for. Eventually, we will build that out so there will be more of the worksheets included in that for a workshop. So you have to just hit one button and then everything that person needs is there and collated. That's what it's there for. In the workshops, we also coordinate the lanyard with the dominant zone, and we coordinate the color of the packet with the dominant zone. So those are 2 other visual cues to let you know what people's dominant zones are and what the overall dominance of the group might be. Now, there's different things to do as well, building your paragraph with someone. So that's the facilitating process that you would go through. And the questions are pretty simple. So for example, when you're working on the genius side of the equation, you would give them general instructions. You'd say, okay, what you're going to see now, and when you look at top of the app, you'll see there's the genius and the kryptonite, and the genius will be in green because that's what we start with. And what I typically say is something like this. There are 8 traits that represent a range of how a strength might look. So we want to identify the one you feel represents you on your best day. And then it'll drop down the 8 traits that you pick from. Now, if they choose quickly, I will typically ask, so why did that one stand out? Was there one that was close? Why did the others not rank as high? Again, your role is to help the person think aloud and process their decisions, not just click them off and checklist the decisions. If they're weighing options, if they're taking time and reading and weighing, I'll say, look, there may be more than one option that rings true. So share which ones are rising to the top. And if they say, well, I like number 2, I'll ask, what do you like about number 2? What's the part of number 2 that really hits you? And then let's compare that now to number 4. You said number 4 is another one close to it. And which part of that rings true? And then I'll ask, do you want to adapt or change the wording in one of them? And we did that this morning with someone. We changed a simple word, in achiever on a kryptonite, and that made the difference. This is like a starter kit. Those 8 traits are not an algorithm. It's a starter kit. And it's the role of the facilitator to help someone dial in, compare and contrast, not make quick decisions. And sometimes they do, but you still want to question and have them process. And then if improving the wording helps, then you can either do it if you're driving the app, or they can do it as well, because it opens up this dialog box. So one of the things they may want to do is expand the sentence or shorten it a bit, change some of the wording. And that's fine, because in the end, we want them to feel some authorship in creating this description. They may want to combine 2. Now, this is a feature we need to smooth out a bit. The way it works now is that if you wanted to combine 1 and 4, I would ask you, which one do you want to lead with? If you say, I want to lead with 4, what I would do is go up to number 1, copy that, open it up, copy it, and then go down to number 4 and add it to the backside and then save it. So there's some steps involved. It's not yet intuitive if an individual wanted to do that on their own, but it's easy to do as a facilitator. I do it all the time, and I edit all the time. Now, part of the advantage I have in editing is I've done this so many times, I can kind of think of where they're going, so I'll just write it out. But ask them to read it aloud if they want to rewrite it. Ask them which part they want to change, and then ask them to think through a couple options, wording options that would help them make it land more in the realm of what they feel. And always say, look, we can always come back and edit this. This is the starter kit. And what we want to do is get those main items. If they're having a hard time and they say, well, these 4 are the ones that I want, then what you would say, okay, let's rank order these. Because sometimes you'll have someone, and they all apply, and you'll have some say, well, gosh, these 4 really stand out. And then just walk through what part of this one, what's similar here. Do you want to combine? Do we want to expand one of them to capture it? But in the end, you want to pick one main one to build off of, or a secondary one to copy and paste in, but you don't want to do 3 and 4. So that's where saying, let's rank order these, and let's start with the top one and the second one. And I've yet to find a person who said, yeah, I want to include 3 of them. Found a lot who want to include 2. Now the kryptonite, again, the instructions are, what you'll see here is you're going to see 4 traits that represent how the range may get in your way. And we want to identify the one that creates the biggest obstacle for you. And the reason we do 4 versus 8 is that the primary focus is building on what's strong. And we do need to manage what gets in our way, but it's not the major focus. We're going to use that because as you go up the ladder as a leader, it's the kryptonite that's going to limit you. It's not, most people get to be successful because they are playing to their strengths more than they're not. And as you'll find with leaders, it's their lack of self-awareness or certain traits that get in their way that create obstacles, misalignments, collateral damage, and they're just not aware of it. And so the more you go up the ladder, the more we focus on helping minimize the kryptonite. Now, working with managers, again, it's the same process, and we want the manager to feel comfortable building paragraphs together, building paragraphs as a team. And then once the paragraphs are built, then it's the process of how do we socialize this and keep sharing it. So the first round is everybody shares their genius paragraph and shares a little bit of backstory and encouraging others to weigh in and comment where they've seen Mary in those traits, or ask, which one of those traits do you see strongest in Mary? This can be for the first month. It's just socializing. And we're going to build a theme scaffolding where month 1 is socializing the genius paragraph. Month 2 is the kryptonite. And we always ask the manager to lead with the kryptonite and let the team in the very first session give feedback on examples before they ask the team to share their kryptonite. Now, I haven't had many situations where the team was hesitant, but I have found when the leader goes first, it opens up all kinds of avenues and dialogue and creates that psychological safety and gives permission. I've only had one team very early on where it was like the third time we met as a group. And I said, okay, let's go in the kryptonite. And I could just feel everybody saying, I don't know if I want to go there. And so I backed off. And of course, I had other things I could work on that, but I went back to the CEO, a new CEO, and they were uncomfortable because it was a new CEO and they didn't know how that was going to go. And the CEO was very obliging and said, sure, I'll go first next time. So we spent the whole time him talking about his kryptonite and stories, and it was great. And so it can be a very positive, safe time if done that way. And then working with managers to help them with the meeting icebreakers, but also helping hold accountability that they are regularly incorporating it. And if not, figuring out what the hesitancy is. If they're overpacking their meetings, or they're taking too long and people, they can't get to their business because they take too long, just helping them learn how to small little deposit. That's all we're looking for, keeping it alive, keeping the interest alive, and creating context. What does Rex look like at his best? How did he, what traits showed up in that project that you and Mary worked on together? And then the performance feedback. That's the manager regularly asking somebody, okay, on this project you were on, share with me where your traits really served you well and where you felt engaged and productive and what part of your traits came alive. Now, the next part is, how would you want to make it even better? What would you do and what would you work on to make it better the next time we meet? And then which areas got in your way and how would you manage that differently next time? And what are we going to do to work on that? I would also have my version of how I saw them in that project. So in addition to their feedback, because the main thing is you want them to own their own reflection and their own review, but also not in a vacuum. And then there's my experience of it as well. And I said, well, let me add a couple things that I think you did extremely well on your traits. And let me add a few things that I saw or I heard that I think could have gotten in your way. How would we work on this? So again, very specific on the traits, good guide rails, but it's designed to be that continuous feedback, creating that feedback culture. There's 3 elements, and we'll close with this part. The 3 elements to making this work, once we've built it, is reinforcing, feedback, and reflection. So the personal growth side of the equation, using those 3 models, is in the morning, I read my genius paragraph. Now, my genius paragraph has developed a lot. It'd be hard for you to recognize my first version with the version now, because every week I'm adapting and changing it. But I read it, and then I look at my calendar, and I ask a simple question. How would this individual, and that's third person for a reason, how would this individual show up at their best? That description that I just gave, how would that person show up at their best in this session with Mary? I don't do a lot with that any more than that, because the way the brain works like a servo mechanism. It's a guidance system. That was research in the 1950s. In fact, there was a book called Psycho-Cybernetics. If you give your brain clear coordinates of what you want it to be or do, and you give it a problem or a question, it automatically works towards those coordinates. It's called the reticular activator, or self-selection. So an example of it is if you have a desire, if you really desire a new car and you've got it in your brain what it is, as you drive, subconsciously you're going to be more aware of those cars on the road. It just happens. That's how effective the brain is. What we don't do is we don't give it that kind of desire and feedback and destination of who we want it to be on the back end of the day. So I build that in to my daily habit. So I have this mug of tea, and my little habit is, if I'm drinking tea, I've got my phone with my Genius paragraph open. Before I drink my tea, I read my paragraph. So I'm linking the habit of reading my paragraph with a current ritual I already have in place. So I build that habit. It's about a 3-minute exercise. At the end of the day, I will reverse the process a bit, and I will have the same Genius and kryptonite paragraph in front of me, whatever ritual you've got, and I will think about the day where I was most engaged, active, and then I will look at my paragraph and ask myself the question, which part of this came alive for me? Which of these traits really came alive? Then if my day, if I had some, and every day I have some things that don't go as well as I thought. So then I'll go back and replay it, look at my kryptonite and say, now what got in my way? Then replay how I would have done it. That's about a 4-minute exercise. So you're investing 7 minutes a day. And the science is very clear. It's that 1% improvement by reinforcing what you want, giving yourself feedback at the end of the day, and doing it consistently. So it's more important you do that, do a little bit consistently, than trying to absorb and read all this stuff about your strength and all those, all the ins and outs about how activator works or achiever works. That's the personal growth side. The team growth side is very similar. So in the icebreaker, the manager is reinforcing. When the team does something together, it's the feedback. How did we do according to what we could have done as our best? That's the plus delta. And then the reflection, what would we do differently? It's the same process.